So good afternoon to everyone, and I'm Shubha from Indian Institute for Human Settlement. Actually, I'm working in Urban Practitioners Program as a lead, and it's a very great to know that a lot of people in a different type of demographies as well as different type of sector people have joined for this webinar, which is very significantly we are going to discuss in this 1 hour, and international participants also has been joining. So there'll be a time zone differences. So good morning and good evening also. So this webinar, the basically I'll set the context to this webinar. Actually, every year annually we are creating a capacity development forum, because being a capacity development department and then institute, so we thought that we have to peer connect with all the institutes to understand how to strengthen the capacities in terms of technicalities, in terms of knowledge transfer, in terms of financial assistance, and in terms of other stakeholder engagements, and what the policy is trying to look, what is actually our outcomes is trying to look, what the impact we are trying to assess. So all these things discussed annually. So for this prelude, we are doing a lot of webinar series. As one of a webinar, it is this, which is the role of multilateral funding in strengthening capacity for urban development, current and future perspectives. I'm moderating the session. So today with me a moderator. So today with me a speaker, Mr. Raghu Kesavan sir is there with me, who have been, I think many people know him, and but a few words about him. Like he's having more than 3 decades of an experience as a senior infrastructure specialist in South Asia Urban Unit of World Bank. And he has led number of urban development investment project for the World Bank, covering range of intervention, including the urban infrastructure services, greenfield city development, urban finance, some slum upgrading, and municipal capacity building and public-private partnerships. In addition, he has also led an analytical and advisory activities in the urban sector. He is also the focal point for World Bank's urban unit in India. He holds the first degree in engineering and a postgraduate MBA from the Indian Institute for Management, Lucknow. So why we choose this topic? It's very important to know today because there is a fund and there are a lot of international funds, multilateral, bilateral partnerships are going on. So one of the thing is like multilateral funding is always a pivotal force in driving the urban development, enabling cities to overcome financial barriers and embrace sustainable practices and fortify the institutional framework essential for long-term prosperity. By blending these financial resources with the technical expertise and strategic policy advice, multilateral organizations are instrument in guiding cities worldwide towards development that harmonizes economic growth, social equity, and environment. So it's a very significant aspect. Always they focus on not only on the financial part, both on the environment, social, as well as the culture, the heritage, and the designs parameters in the urban infrastructure. And we kept a lot of webinars and a lot of people as an IHS as an urban development systems we are focusing on. We talk about how the city should look future or how it's looking today and what we learned to lesson, how the policy should be focused. So a lot of discussion is going around this. So it's very critical to keep this webinar at this point of time. And this webinar, I'll also give two objectives of this webinar. As being a capacity building, this webinar is going to focus more to explore the most effective strategy, what multilateral funding is expecting to enhance local and regional capacities in urban planning, governance, and infrastructure development. And also, today there are different types of, we talk about water supply, sanitation, green spaces, and everything. But today there is a huge transition in the energy transition, digital transformation, regional integrations, and urban rural transition. So a lot of things are happening to bring a resilience, and exclusively climate resilience is playing a major role to uplift the cities actually. So we want to understand critically through all these things how city through the capacities how it can be improved. So we are going to understand from the World Bank perspective. So we that's a very significant aspect to understand how we are trying to equip ourselves to try for the evolving global landscape. So that's one of the context I want to set. So with this, I now request Raghu Keshavan sir to give about World Bank, the objectives, what you're trying to do in these urban infrastructures, and what World Bank's current objectives and what they want to have a future objectives. And that's in a nutshell. Then we will have a moderated questions.
Yeah, thank you, Shubha, for the introduction and setting the tone for this particular session on webinar. I'll just give a brief introduction to how World Bank looks at urban development in India, and then we can go through the moderated questions quickly, and then have sufficient time for question answers or any open discussion. So let me begin. I'm sure everybody is aware of World Bank as a multilateral institution, and we operate in India across multiple. So we are a development financial institution, primarily working with sovereign governments across the world, and in India also that is the case. So we work closely with the national government, the state governments, and city governments, and across a range of sectors that I'm sure everybody knows, is including urban development, but of course also education, health, agriculture, transport, energy, uh, general economic governance, poverty alleviation, etc., etc. And you can find additional information on the various sectors and contacts are also on our website. And the World Bank has a strong presence in India, and I think our overall portfolio is probably in the range of 20 billion US dollars, and covering all the sectors I just mentioned. In terms of how we, at a very broad level, how we sort of engaged at this country level is governed by what is called a country partnership framework, CPF. And the CPF is usually done once in 4 to 5 years, which is done in close collaboration with the national government, but also have consultations with the state governments and other stakeholders. Here again, not just governments, but also private sector, civil society, NGOs, academic think tanks, etc., etc. And so this broadly outlines the what are the sectors that the bank will engage over the next 4 to 5 years. What is the main objectives that we're trying to achieve? How will we measure these outputs and outcomes, and what's the sort of funding envelope that we will look at? So these are broadly the kind of things that we cover in a CPF, and the new CPF is just about to start being prepared, which will cover the period from 2025 to 2030. So that is the thing on that. And in terms of the urban development itself, now I'll come to the specifics. As you're aware, the World Bank does both lending as well as advisory or analytical work. Since anyway, the session is devoted to the analytical work, so I won't dwell on it now, and we can talk about it later. But on the lending side, uh, there are three primary instruments that are used for financing, which is the IPF, which is the investment project financing. Then there is the program for results, and the third is a policy loan. And these are the three financial instruments. And within the urban space, we have been traditionally using the investment project financing. I will briefly explain what these three are. So the investment project financing is your typical project financing where you identify a project, maybe it's a water supply network in a city. Then you actually have a project costing, and there's a contracting, and then the contracts are bid out, and then the bank finances those execution of those contracts. And so that's the traditional way of doing it. And along with the IPF, there's always usually a technical assistance component as well, capacity building, which we will discuss in detail later. A newer instrument, which is only now beginning to use in India, is what's called a program for results, or a P4R. And a P4R is different in the sense it's less output, less input driven, and much more the output driven. So the notion being that the funding goes towards supporting some results which will be there. So just that we are all then much more focused on, what is the end result of this program, and we, on achieving of those results, then we fund certain. So for instance, we might say that the same water supply network, we can turn it around and say so many X number of house connections provided or X number of people benefiting. So then we'll say per connection, we can have a funding of so and so. So that is another way of looking at the projects. And uh, so this is a newer instrument which we have tried in primarily in only one state till now, and we're sort of two states till now. And as we go forward, we might sort of scale it up as well. The third is what is called the development policy loan, which is almost entirely focused on policy changes by the government. And so this is a budgetary support. So there is no project, there is no thing, and it's straight off. And this can be done both the national and state level. But in the urban, we have not tended to do so in India, and primarily it has been the IPF has been the predominant instrument, followed by P4R as an emerging instrument. Though the government of India has, though we have done it in other parts of the world, of course, where, for instance, in Morocco, it has there was a whole series of DPLs focused on solid waste management policies, so that they can come out with a policy. Then they have a tariff policy. Then looking at how do you build the capacities of cities, etc., etc. So that it depends, but here somehow we have not tried that. Coming to the investments portfolio itself, so it of course mirrors the overall approach of World Bank, which is that it covers both investments and technical assistance. In terms of the investments, uh, we have about 10 projects ongoing, and they total add up to about $2 billion US dollars. And so these projects have, they cover they're all at the state and city level. So we have projects in Tamil Nadu, in Gujarat, in Madhya Pradesh, Jharkhand, in and Andhra Pradesh. And these have a mix of both a single city project, a single city urban project, and they also can be multi-city urban projects. And these single city urban projects tend to focus on multiple sectors within that city. And so we have two ongoing ones, one for Chennai, which is looking at multiple sectors. And then we have recently started work on Amravati, which is the new capital city of Andhra Pradesh. And multi-city projects tend to have a structure whereby it's some sort of a sort of a municipal or an urban fund which is there at the state level, which is managed by a state level entity. And then the cities are encouraged to come forward and seek assistance for certain whatever are their city's priorities, so that it's demand driven and it has a local ownership. And also, all these projects also combine a strong TA, which of course we'll talk about it as we go later. And uh, uh, the subsectors which are traditionally there as part of this urban is one, of course, is your traditional urban infrastructure, which is water, wastewater, solid waste, and the mobility and things like that. We are doing a bit of low income housing as well, which is relatively a minor part of the portfolio, but still it's also an area of interest. And how do we enhance the availability of affordable housing, including through private sector or subsidy mechanisms, etc., etc. And the third is two emerging areas for the World Bank is, of course, as Shubha also mentioned, climate resilience. And how do we support the climate resilience of cities? There's a lot of work to be done, of course, but still making a beginning there. And the other one is now increasingly, since everybody's talking about jobs, how do we have cities foster jobs, the urban areas, which are very critical for job creation. And so, though that's broadly an overview of how the World Bank's urban approach is, and just in the emerging CPF also, urban will feature prominently. and then so we'll see how best to take this agenda forward, both on all the sectors that I mentioned, and how do we deploy states, I mean, these instruments at the state level, and supporting both state urban priorities as well as national priorities. So let me stop there and over to you, Shubha.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. It's very outlinedly you have made it the what you are looking for the current and what it is going to have the perspectives in the future. So we can deep dive it in the next sessions because it's a lot of things have been coming up here. But today focus was on the capacity strengthening. So we focus on that. And the first questions which I want to ask you that how do multilateral organizations conceptualize and operationalize capacity building within the context of urban development, particularly in low and middle income countries?
Yeah, so I mean, I can talk a lot of India, and it's probably similar globally as well. But the capacity building activities are primarily linked to our investments projects. So that is, I mean, they also could be cross-cutting and generic, but still it is ties in closely with our projects.
Mm,
So there, I think the conceptualization means that when we have certain objectives to be met for that project or program, then we see what are the capacity gaps which are there, and then we see how best to tailor the capacity building to achieve those objectives. So, for instance, I mean, again, and just to take an example, either from water or solid waste, we want to say that we want to increase the level of coverage or access to quality, then obviously the hard investments is one part of it, but in terms of the soft availability, how do we make sure that the capacity is there? So it might mean strengthening the capacity of the staff who are going to work on these projects. We may want to get in external consultants for project management, design of the engineering systems, NGOs to maybe help houses connect to the network and facilitate that process, which we have actually done in Madhya Pradesh quite successfully. And so those sort of activities. So that's how that underpins the primary way in which capacity building is actually. In addition to that, there could also be cross cutting,
mm,
and those can also be respond to certain governments' priorities. And for instance, governments might want to improve e-governance in local bodies, just
sure.
as an example, which is not linked to any project, but yeah. So
Yeah. Uh, uh, to this question, follow up a question like, as you said that it's clearly on the strengthening of the organization. I know the investment project, there is a percentage of money is going for the capacity building itself and stakeholders to be trained, even the project management units and everything. But one of the significant aspect want to understand that's an individual level of capacities. But I want to also say what the multinational institutions like you adopt to enhance the institutional and governance capacity in cities because there is always the dynamic needs of urban environment is changing. It's changes to a variety. For example, if you take water supply or a sanitation or solid waste, the challenges are more pragmatic because due to population or due to different type of things. So how this institutional adaptations or governance capacities in cities are looked from your point of view when you're doing in the investment projects?
yeah, so you're right. I mean, in the earlier one is probably more to do with the at the very the detailed level in terms of actual projects and contracts. But at higher level, how do we look at it? So in higher level, when we look at governance, so as you're all aware, the in Indian cities, the 74th Amendment in the decentralization process is still very much a work in progress. So, at that high level, the issue really is about how can we make sure that the cities have the autonomy, and in terms of the capacity, I mean, generic capacity, institutional capacity, is there organizations structure? Uh, I mean, suitable for the current urban development environment? And do they have the skills to do that? And so this is a very tough problem. I mean, there is no easy solution to that. But the only ways that we have tried to sort of address this is to say that, cities should maybe look at their organization chart, see what new skills that they need, and whether they can begin to have a system in place where they can get market skills as
Mm.
when necessary. So, for instance, you say evolving needs, so solid waste management is one prime example, which requires environmental engineers, which many cities don't have, and with an ability to actually understand technologies and all of that. So, does the organization, the staffing rules allow you to get in environment engineers? If not, then can you look get in people from the private sector on a periodic basis or something of that sort? So we facilitate that part also in certain states we have done that. And the last thing is, of course, like in a P4R, we have provided incentives for reducing vacancies. So you may have the staff structure in place, but you may not have the you should go ahead and fill those positions too. So that's at a more broader level. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Another one, it's very nice, like, you see about the organization structures, their skills, what they are trying to build up, how the governance structure is there. That's one of an important aspect which we try to look at. One of the question is that, multilateral organization, as you said, as you are coming from the urban development, you fund for the urban development project. But how do they align with the specific evolving needs of urban area? For an example, it can be a rural boundary, it can be a culturally differences between the borders between the states, the projects being involved in that. So how the multilateral funding looks in that way when they are funding for the interconnected projects between the interstates or boundaries or in the country, inter-countries also. That's one of the questions which we want to ask.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have a scenario of inter-countries now because cities are, firmly within the borders or whatever. So that is not there. Excepting to the extent, to some extent, air pollution, which sort of has in Indo-Gangetic plains. It's a cross-country problem, and what happens in one city will affect somewhere else, etc., etc. But that is a far more tricky problem. I mean, and that is not only urban, but that is also spillover from rural, etc., and also links with transport and mobility. But other than that, in terms of, I think the real crux of the issue here is probably where the cities are there in peri-urban areas and rural transformation. That is a far more complicated problem. So and that happens all the time. So I guess the cities are dealing with it in multiple ways. One is, of course, that they expand the boundary, which is what Chennai's and Bangalore's and Hyderabad's have done. So in that, when that happens, then the cities and the state government say that where the areas lack infrastructure and service delivery, they would like us to prioritize there. So which are the underserved areas, and say let us bring those areas on par with the core city. So that is one way that we sort of directly address that part. The second part is that when we actually design these systems, we can make sure that for instance, the water trunk infrastructure is designed to cater to a larger population, which will sort of join the city network over time. Similarly, when you're doing this capacity building and the staffing, you can think about how the entire region will evolve. And the last thing is that when you do the urban planning, how can we make sure that you're taking into account the neighboring areas as well? And this is particularly important for instance, in flood management. So some of the water bodies need not be within the city, but you might have a spillover effect if some other district lake overflows and then the water enters the city and all that. So then there you take a so that cuts across all these areas of planning, engineering, design, capacity building, staffing, etc., and all of them. Yeah, but yeah, so that happens all the time, and we see what best can be done.
Yeah, it's we can understand that like you're talking about the apportionment structures between if it's an interconnected states project. So what is the skills between both of them and how they try to diverse or how they are going to cut across towards that. One of the questions to that follow-up question that see when exclusively we are coming from the capacity building time, so we want to understand also all your World Bank projects are all it's like a long term like 5 years. It's 5 years more than that. Like it goes phase one, phase two, phase three. So There will be a lot of capability of the local government and urban stakeholders to be mapped it and to be trained it in a very bigger projects like a it's a million type of project, for example. So how World Bank effectively strengthen the human, technical, and managerial capabilities. It's not only a report of interim report that the client sends to you and you review it, but you also have a ground truth audits in many part of the city. So any type of reflection you had it with a very positive or a critical challenges that how this comes, because these skills are very important, technical, managerial, as well as the social skills also it's important. How it looking from your angle of your lenses, like multi organization strengthen this area?
Yeah, so this is an important topic, and as I mean, it's linked to the earlier question as well in terms of institutional capacities, but specifically on the human side and technical and managerial and capabilities. Uh, there, I mean, first and foremost is that can we improve the systems? I mean, it's not just a report that we give, but can we improve systems which are there? So systems. So there is where the e-governance systems at the city level make a big difference. And that has been successfully done in some say states, and I think there's a wide variation across the country, obviously, as you're aware. But it's something which directly impacts the day-to-day citizens. So, for instance, grievance redress mechanisms. If you can automate that and use that to sort of actually measure, and if you give people multiple channels to access, then the city can respond much more effectively. You link it to a GIS mapping, then you have even more very localized kind of intelligence on why things are not going well in certain places. So that's one part. The second part is of the strengthening managerial capacities. Is, as I mentioned, we look at the organization staffing structure of cities and see to it that they have a good number of engineers, a good number of newer skills. Just like I mentioned, SWM, IT skills is another one which very difficult for cities to get them. So can we have a special cadre of those people who can join there? And the third way of actually supporting managerial and human capacities, the kind of training programs that we actively fund in the projects. And here, no, I think institution like IHS or whoever else is there has a big role to play, because if can this ULB staff come for short courses, can they come for the some sort of a certification kind of arrangement. Nowadays, there are a lot of e-learning courses available. We used to have a World Bank Institute earlier, which used to have a lot of e-learning courses, but so that is another area, and we're sort of trying to see if we should restart them. The Ministry of Urban and Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs is also thinking along these lines. If they can have a network of institutions who can then in turn support ULBs and the staff to sort of keep themselves current on this one. So yeah, so this is the one way, and I guess just to add once more, one last thing is we have also supported actually setting up of institutions in very rare instances, not very often. That have sort of actually been set up and then helped build some capacity in terms of urban sector knowledge, etc., etc.
Um, to this question, I want to add it. It's very nice, like you have brought about one of the things on the e-learning courses, because today it's a lot of stuff, a lot of knowledge sharing is happening in the onlines and everything because the reports and all. And as you said, the National Urban Learning Platform of Mahas is also working, and I just also provided a few courses to that when they asked us. One of the question to that, like this is actually somewhat differences from the questions what I want to ask you. Like you have been funding the institutions on the financial lending and doing the projects and everything is doing their investment projects or something else. But as you said, this is the one fifth point you have said about the setting up of an institutions to make the knowledge things. So there is any existing system in India? There is any type of an organization is set by the World Bank focusedly to make your objective very clear to them. Any institutes has been collaborated like that with you? Because I know there will be a PMU and they will monitor with the clients and everything. But there is any institute that World Bank has partnered and done in India? Anything else like this happening?
Yeah, so I think yeah, the answer is yes, and we helped set up the National Institute of Urban Management in Hyderabad,
Okay. Mm.
in Telangana. So that was actually conceptualized under one of our projects, and then of course they took it forward. We just had a very initial role only, but government of Telangana then took it forward in a big way. And now today it's an institution there, and which has its own staffing and all that. Yeah, but other than that, I mean, we do tend to do it on an on and off basis in the sense also on related to specific projects and tasks. So for that, we have, for instance, we do a lot of work along with NIUA as well, Institute of Urban Affairs in Delhi. But it is very much linked to certain specific topics or specific projects, or I mean, analytical projects and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, great actually. And participants, one of the things which we want to tell, if you have any questions, please type in Q&A boxes, because we want to discuss your points also, because a lot of heterogeneous group have been joined. So utilize this time so that we can have an exclusively 10 to 15 minutes on the discussion of the questions. So that is. To follow up this question, sir, one of an important aspect which you said about the climate resilience and skills and the urban future is going to be focused on that. So, what type of, as a curiosity to ask on the future, like what this multilateral institution play in fostering the development of local talent and leadership in urban management, particularly in areas such as climate resilience and urban planning and social equity? Because as you said, there should be also a leadership roles to get into this, because it's not only at the national level, but it should drop down to the state, it drop down further downsize into the regional, and still we say rural, it goes to the leadership of Gram Panchayat and the serpent, because they are the ultimate as implementers. So can you throw a light how multilateral institution takes about all these cadres to develop exclusively on the climate resilience and urban planning?
So on the cadre itself, it's what I told. I mean, in this where we have, I mean, where we can, we support institutions, or we can we help the staff. Can be supported to, I mean, ULB staff can be supported to get some certification programs, tailor-made training programs, etc. The other big the thing that value addition that we try to bring in is to bring in global knowledge to the people in the local level. So we can facilitate some knowledge exchange programs with other cities, comparable cities. So that is another way of doing that. In climate resilience itself, I think what we are trying to do in certain projects is that at the city level, try to have some sort of a climate action plan at the city level, and see whether that can set a broad framework for how the cities can look at this. And then once you know that, you also know then what type of skills you need, whether you need and how you can sort of strengthen those capacities as well. But at least to begin with, we are doing this through the support of private sector, who can come in and prepare these climate action plans and all that. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. And one of questions which I have to ask after this list, like, what are the indicators or a methodology used to follow, the World Bank used to follow to assess the long-term impact on the urban governance exclusively through the capacity building when you're reviewing the process after completions? We can say it's an impact.
Yeah, so there I think, yeah, so you're right. I mean, the longer term thing is impact. So the way we approach results, or the way we approach measurement of how the projects do is right at the starting of the project itself, we have to put in place what are the results that we will measure. And so those are already part of our project documents, and I'm sure all of you might have seen it. So we say that, at the end of 5 years or 6 years, what is it that this project will achieve? And there that includes capacity building and activities as well. So, for instance, one might say that if they're putting in place systems, then the grievance redressal mechanism should be able to address grievances up to 95% within a period of 2 days or 5 days or whatever. Or one could say that the vacancy levels have been reduced to less than 5%. Or one could say that so many people have got certified through some urban courses. So there'll be some number of people to have done. So those are the metrics, but those are decided upfront in terms of what we achieve at the end of 5 years. Then over the long term, of course, it's a more. I mean, we don't do that for every project, because after we evaluate at the end of the 5 years, then a few selected projects are only taken for a long term impact evaluation.
Thank you, sir. Now, other question which I want to ask you, because you told when the World Bank objective is not only the state governments or particular the project client, it is between the private sector, civil societies, and everybody. That's a looking on the stakeholder, very broad stakeholders on this. So, see, we are interconnected because today there is an interconnections between across the country. And how can multilateral bodies facilitate cross-sectoral collaboration between governments, private sector, and civil society to create a robust, adaptable, and resilient urban systems? What is your reflections of all your knowledge you put and the experiences? Because the convergence in some way, it's not like uh, every time we talk about it's not happening in what we think it of. So, what actually, from your perspective, you look on this?
Yeah, so the private sector, so both private sector and civil society are important parts of how banks sees these urban interventions, and I'll tell you how exactly they come in. So the on the private sector side, the main thing is that firstly to address this capacity issue, gap issue. So there, I think we actively foster private public-private partnerships. And specifically, what I mean is things like that. For instance, in water supply, and again in the context of climate resilience, if you want to reduce non-revenue water, so then you give out a PPP contract to see how can you manage the systems better. Similarly, you want to have a solid waste management, but operating a facility is difficult. So then you give out something with operation maintenance contract for 5 10 years. So that's on the the long-term PPP arrangements, and this we actively do in our projects to the extent wherever an opportunity arises. Then, of course, we are also saying that you should also mobilize more private funding, because cities in India do not have cannot be entirely managed by public funding. So please raise municipal bonds, strengthen your finances, see what options are available in terms of raising finances and beyond the budgetary support. It could be also due to land value capture, things like that. The civil society part, so here, so this is part of our, what can I say, the way we look at social impacts and social processes. And there, before any interventions is actually designed, they have to go through a consultation process. And we work closely with the clients to make sure that there is consultation process, and the consultation process involves putting out the documents, draft documents, so that the stakeholders can comment on it. Stakeholders, I mean intended beneficiaries, but it can also be NGOs. It can be, and then they're actually called for stakeholder meetings, again making sure that adequate notice is given, their issues are documented, and we can see to what extent we can do that. And in our new policy for the environment and social, we say that we will do this on an ongoing basis. That means not a one-off kind of thing. But even once the project is under implementation or during operation, you have a periodic way of engaging with civil society, beneficiaries, etc., etc. So that's how we try to make sure that there is a linkages between government, society, and the private sector. So that.
Thank you, sir. And one of the questions is also your participants also asked, which I've also mapped in the questions like, see, the global framework, what you're mentioning on capacities and all, because the project is coming again to the local context. So, what is actually the flexibility of the states to tweak the proposals or the budgetary provisions or the implementations? How the global framework fits into the local? Can you throw your experiences on this?
Yeah, so here I should say that, frankly, it is almost entirely driven by the local priorities. I know the bank doesn't go and say that you should only implement water supply now, or you should only implement this, or you should not do this, that. And that, it's not like that. It is, so at the CPF level, at the country point level, we have a broad sector, right? We want to say we want to strengthen urban development, and we want to, within urban development, this is objectives, it could be say that strengthening capacities, strengthening living conditions, livability of people, and make them more climate resilient and all that. But within that, how do you actually get to that is very much city specific and local priorities. So for instance, a city like Chennai will have a lot of flooding issues. So they will want to look at flooding. But interior part of Madhya Pradesh may not have flooding. So they may not want to look at urban flooding. So we are not. So we would say that, what is your priority, and they might say in the area of climate resilience, our problem is heat, and during summer we have very high temperatures. So how can we reduce that? So it really depends. So there is complete flexibility other than this broad framework which is there, and then of course making sure that the projects have a good economic returns, in the sense benefits to the people. So those are certain filters that may come in, that they have a good gender focus, that they engage citizens properly and all of that. So that is those are filters that apply. But the basic interventions, what should be there, that's always left to the city's priorities.
Yeah. Towards this question, because you talked about the communities and everything, one of the questions which we want to tell, like, this ECMF, when you talk about ECMF, this is a very big chapter which to be addressed in every projects within that. So, so the marginalized community or a vulnerable community, what we are trying to say, resettlements or whatever thing, if it is there in the urban planning process, so how the multilateral funding have a significant role in this, because the project is one side is a development, but other side there's a resettlement or something, there's going to be a downturn to that. We do rehabilitation resettlement sites and all, but still we have to balance it. That's where all the principles of environments have come up. But how this marginalized community are included in urban planning process, particularly when using funding from the multilateral sources, how you look from the bank side?
Yeah, so that, as I said, we have to do it's mandatory for the we have to do a social impact assessment before we undertake the project. So that social impact assessment will bring to the fore what you just said. Are people going to be resettled and all that, and even otherwise. I mean, so when we look at service delivery, the idea is that one should have universal coverage. So meaning that there should be priority to cover slums and all of that, and the resettlement is to be avoided to the maximum possible, and only if it's inevitable and we have no choice, then that's when we only look at it. But not otherwise. I mean, so the idea would always be that you do in situ development, you make sure you come with technology solutions, things like that. And for instance, you can, just to give one example, on sewage treatment plants, instead of, you can load advanced technologies which have a much smaller footprint. So you need less land for that, for instance, things like that. That is done, and then the main way to approach this is through consultation process, which, as I mentioned, during social impact assessments, we have to mandate consultations. And lastly, the grievance redressal is supposed to be there. So we in all projects need to have a local grievance redressal mechanism, so the people have access to that at any point of time. And then many projects also have a thing that you should hire local NGOs and civil society during the implementation itself, so that the people can approach the NGOs and then through them the government or whatever.
And follow up to this questions, because this is a very significant questions which we also talked about. Looking ahead, what emerging trends in digital transformation, public-private partnerships, and regional integration do you think multilateral organizations should focus on to better support cities? Because there's a huge digital transformation is coming up. So how cities looks in it, and what type of capacities they are trying to in your future projects, what type of capacities are current, which is in a process of appraisals, what you try to expand it in terms of capacity strengthening, because there, in terms of digital, in terms of regional integrations, or in terms of public private partnerships, or any other things which is very significant aspect.
Yeah, so I think both on digital and public-private partnership, we are simply not doing enough. That's very clear. The cities in India. So the public-private partnership, we have had a very mixed record, as you know, in India. So the more we can scale it up through better risk-sharing structures, the better it is. And I don't think there have been many PPPs contracts awarded, but I don't think they are too successful, whether it's solid waste management or water, things like that. So how do we make them work going forward, and how do you scale them up? Certainly important. On digital, again, it is very similar. I think it's only a couple of few states in southern and western India which have done a good work. But a lot of cities in India do need to scale up digital systems, and this is quite a challenge because obviously getting IT people to come and work for you is tough. And going forward, the main thing is, of course, I mean, one can talk about AI and all that in urban applications, but I would think that the main thing is simply to be able to use digital systems better for day-to-day decision making in your regular operations, which currently in cities is not happening that much as it should. So, can we get the city governments to use it for planning, have GIS maps? I don't know how many cities have up-to-date GIS maps even. Can they use it to strengthen property coverage, use strengthen property tax collections? Can they use to identify unserved areas on water? Can they use it to see uncollected garbage? And all of that can be done. So the first order of business is all these, and then of course we'll come to AI at a later point of time, etc. Though I think globally a lot of talk is happening. But just getting the urban applications and using use cases for cities is, I think, the key.
Yeah. And one of the final question before we move on to the questions in the chat box. Some three questions, four questions are there. One of the question is that there are two type of approaches are there. One is top down approaches where the policy comes framework, then it deep dive into the national forum, and then it goes to states and the regional and the community. There is a bottom top approach where it goes to trend. In terms of capacity, I'm asking how the ladders works, because after seeing n number of projects both in water sanitation and green spacing, you have done most of both green fields and brownfield projects. So how now these systems, because some people telling it's a community led participation approach, that's one of a significant aspect. We have seen all Jal Jeevan missions, SBM, Swachh Bharat mission, exclusively in Indian context, I'm telling it. So state is more particular on bottom top. The national is on the top bottom, because as a World Bank, being a technical assistance as well as financial resources providing, as well as an inclusive development, you want it, not leaving anybody left behind it. So what do you think, which approach works significantly for definitely for the sustainable and economic growth?
Yeah, I mean, there's no either or it's not a mutually exclusive thing. I mean, there's no easy way to answer this. But I guess it needs a combination of both. But basically, urban is a state subject. So the heart of the matter is in the state urban departments. That is very clear, and so they need to be able to formulate policies at the same time hear from the bottom up from the cities. The national government can at best do incentive programs, advocacy, setting the context and regulatory standards and stuff like that. But the action is really at the city and state level, and at the city level, then the councillors need to be much more attuned towards what the citizens want. So there, I think, yeah, certainly we have to strengthen the bottom-up feedback loops much more. I mean, we should make sure that the citizens can influence the local leaders. And the way to do it is we build in forums and mechanisms to do that. I mean, the 74th Amendment has something, but I don't think it's happening too much. But we can say that the city should put out annual reports on publicly disseminate how much service delivery they are doing, how are they formulating the budgets, and things like that. And so we should have that part. So I think it's a combination of both. Both need to get strengthened, no question about it. Both the city to city, means states to city and citizens to city and states. Yeah.
There is now I'm taking the questions from the participants. Some of the question was answered by you, but still the some of the questions they have directly asked to get from you. Like one of the question is that You have mentioned that my question is with regard to aspect of peri-urban areas. Uh, you have mentioned that these areas are very difficult in implementation of projects and policies. My question is, these limitations are limited to governance or land use, or there are any other critical observation by you in terms of policy, especially on the infrastructure push?
No, planning and land use is certainly one, but the other is also with regard to availability of finance. And I think the cities simply lack the financial capacity to actually bring on board a big, newly added area onto same service delivery levels. So that is one, and so it has a lot of financial implications as well. I mean, you need more capacity for water treatment plants, more capacity for solid waste management, etc., etc. So it has both financial as well as human institutional capacity implications certainly, because these cities, these newly added areas tend to be weak on set of human resources as well. So how do we quickly ramp up the local staff there, etc.?
This is a repeated question. One of our participants asked it, like, how the World Bank ensure the capacity building programs have long term impact, which is already discussed. So you want to throw any more light what you discussed earlier, because this is one of the questions, because for the capacity building institutes, what they're trying, you look from the World Bank.
Yeah. So this is obviously, I appreciate this, question being asked again now, because this is again a very tough topic. On how do you ensure long-term sustainability? So as I said, I mean, if you are going to reduce the vacancy levels, if you're meaning to certified courses, then those have long-term impacts, because a person who has got a certificate on, I don't know, maybe water management or solid waste management, that expertise will remain with the city, provided it is not transferred. Similarly, if you reduce the vacancy levels in a city, then those staff will remain. And if you strengthen the urban institutions for country, then they will remain a long-term resource for them as well. Short-term training courses, etc., probably wear off after some time, and you need refresher courses. So they are not that long-term. But I guess the best way is to set up good institutions and make sure cities can connect with them.
And there is a question from internally from IHS, one of our faculty only from UPP. How can e-governance integration prioritize funding to address climate change, ecological imbalances, and anthropogenic impacts, while ensuring social impact through monitoring and promoting financial growth, incentivization, and recognition? Because you mentioned on the e-governance to be strengthened in the local level. So the question has been raised in this.
So e-governance can do it in a strengthening on the climate resilience part. It has a lot of linkages. But let me give you an example from Chennai. So Chennai, they did this flood control thing where they had an e-governance, flood control decision support system. So what they did was, they managed to do a lot of modeling and have very granular, local level, street level flooding data, which sort of, I mean, in advance. For instance, if they project this amount of rainfall over the next 48 hours or so, then they can predict at which granular level in this street how much water will accumulate and flood and all that. And so they could manage the flooding better that way. They can, have pumping systems or installed beforehand. They can divert traffic. They can plan for that. So that is one way of doing it. But other thing on the climate, and which is in a broad, not only e-government, but a broader thing, is I think we lack the amount of analytical and data at the local level. We simply don't know, what is the frequency of flooding which will come. We don't know how the heat temperatures will vary, which part of the year it will come, etc., etc. So I think that strengthening the analytics behind climate would be a very important part.
Yeah. There is two questions. I'll take this too, because one of the question is that do you feel with an introduction of new technologies like AI for the designing plans and structures, or a road transport mechanism for urbanization will eventually lead to decline of capacity building interventions?
How can I answer that? This is a question everybody is grappling with globally, whether AI will make people lose jobs. So I don't have an answer to that.
Yeah. And another one, we again talk about that. I also want to have these questions What is the prioritized hierarchy you're looking for that? Like institutional building is an important or an individual capacity, or what are the other local actors playing? Because we are curating the course for different agencies, different public, privates, different government, different schemes, and different domain expertise. So there is a different level. A technician training is different from the implementers, practitioners like engineers and officials. Policymakers is on the decision maker side, like they wanted data for that. So what do you think about and to develop an institutional framework, whether the institutional capacity is a significant aspect or the individual capacity is a significant aspect? How you balance? What is the weightage you give from your experience of you have made a lot of project appraisals in this, so I want to know about that.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, one doesn't have to prioritize too much between them. I
Mm.
mean, setting up new institutions, obviously, we don't do that often. So that is clearly not an immediate thing. We'll jump at it in every time. But within the institutions, you mean to say city governments or whatever. So that to the extent it is, I mean, it is very long and time consuming. So to the extent where it can be done in a reasonable amount of time, we will do combine that along with individual capacity building. So individual capacity building is always related to usually, as I mentioned, to our project intervention, whether it's water or wastewater or something, then we do that. But otherwise, the institution-wide capacity building also we do it along with that in parallel wherever it's possible. I mean, it has to be implemented in a reasonable amount of time. So the e-governance is, in some sense, an easier way to do it. But other than that, I mean, changing the entire organization structure, etc., is not something that is easily doable. So unless the government is very keen to do it and they want to do it, then only we can do a support of that. So I guess one doesn't have to choose between the two. One can do a little bit of both.
Yeah. And one of the questions, this is politically like priorities of donor countries. One of the participants have asked it. How do shifting political priorities in donor countries affect the World Bank's ability to fund long-term urban development projects in middle and poor income countries?
Yeah, that is true. I mean, their political priorities might change, and so they. I mean, it is possible. But what, at least in the urban context, what we tended to see is that the city level challenges mostly remain the same. So to that extent, I think the whether it's I mean cities, we have a set of issues that at least Indian cities are grappling with, which are water and congestion and air pollution and solid waste and flooding, etc. So while there could be some changes in priorities, I mean, state governments do change in India, etc. But only other than the big ticket changes like the Amravati case. But other than that, other than the few high profile cases, for the rest of it, I think it sort of works because the citizens of the city do want water. I mean, then the new government can't say, I will not give water. So, I mean, so as long as it's a very local infrastructure kind of thing, it sort of works. It's less susceptible to political change, I would say that.
Thank you. We are going to have one closing questions with you because the questions has been answered mostly. One of the questions, it's a two parts I've divided, and this will be a final question. One of the part is, as you told that earlier, you have tried to fund the National Institute of Urban Management in Telangana, and then government took over that to do that. And also, there is any World Bank is thinking in a larger way into the middle income countries to develop like that a model in future to collaborate and do like this, because the schemes and the expansions and the innovations are big enough now. So definitely the capacity has to be rolled out at all levels, not only in the major levels. So there is any type of lookups are there in futures to like that institution to happen. It can be a government consortiums or whatever, but there is a World Bank provisions to this.
So we are doing that in a couple of ways. So globally, internationally, what we're doing is that we have certain established setups with certain governments. So, for instance, we have an urban hub in Japan, and the Japanese government sort of has a course, or rather, a series of courses through the year for on different urban topics. It will be urban regeneration, solid waste, municipal finance, transit-oriented development, and etc., which they roll out through the year. And so we help facilitate that for the clients. Similarly, we have a hub in South Korea. They have to provide this thing. So this is one way of making sure that we can bring some international knowledge. In India, actually, as I mentioned, we're just beginning to think on this one. The bank has been doing some work with the Capacity Building Commission of the
Mm.
Government of India. And so there again, urban is one piece of that. And similar discussions are ongoing with the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs as well, to see whether we can set up set of we can support or strengthen a set of institutions across the country, which can then in turn feed into the urban system. So these 2 3 initiatives, I mean, they're all sort of being thing, but the Japanese and Korean ones have been underway for some years now. I mean, a lot of Indian clients have taken advantage of that in terms of going
Yeah.
there, learning that. Yeah.
Wait, we look forward that because we also work with CBC capacity building commissions because we work with ISS and all. So we want to strengthen that more also because we want to converge that. And second question is which is one of the thing is that when you are uprising a project, validating a project, and you're setting your context, advisories, advocating, and everything. What is the percentage of roles you're giving to capacities development? Because I understand if it's a 1,500 crores, some percentage has been given to the capacity building. What is the percentage? It's a fixed percentage, or it is like it's demands to the projects.
Yeah, there's no fixed percentage. It really depends on the project, and usually, I mean, so in the case of IPF, it will tend to be in the range of 5 to 10, between 5 to 10%, because those is, as I mentioned, linked to actual contracts, etc., etc. And there is, but in program for results, as I mentioned, it is grants, incentive grants linked to outcomes. So there we can actually put in more money for the capacity building outcomes.
Okay.
So it depends. It's not exactly proportional to the project cost. I mean, there's no limit on 5% or 6% or something like that. But we can say that if we want to make sure that certain institutional reforms are very critical, then we can say that the DLA incentive grants for that is much higher. So that depends.
Okay. And the final question is that like in a 5 years project, when you're funding it, there is one time the capacity building is rolled out, whether it's a 1 year, 2 years, the 100 people or 150, 300. How do you measure phase wise this? Because it should be a continuous momentum. So there is any type of like you give funding phase one, phase two, phase three project if it's a big phase of the project. So there is any stress from the bank side to the state or the whatever the client, there should be a continuous progress in the capacities to be improved because there is a dynamic change in the environment.
No, it is not a one-time thing. It's a continuous thing through the duration of the project. Obviously, it will not go beyond the
Okay.
duration of the project, but within the project, it's not a one-time thing. It rolls out. It's on a rolling basis. So
Okay.
as I mentioned, we set targets for the end of the project, right? So
Okay.
that implies that you have to roll it out through the 5 years.
Okay. Okay. So thank you, sir. Great discussing with you. We look forward to meet in like this webinars and more of this. And we are because this is a very significant aspect to understand because now IHS is taking a directions that we should also understand others' capacity building efforts and pedagogies and other institutional focus so that we try to realign the system so that it benefits because everybody is putting the wheel in these urban development. So we should also focus on how we contribute and each contribute and it converges for the better outcome. So that's why the part of peer connect on the capacity development forum emerges actually. And also with you are there here, I can it's not an it's an official, not because it will come as a brochures and all. We are trying to do in June, probably in Delhi, on our capacity development forum in a bigger way, where we are going to connect in-person meets. So I request that is also one sense of in-person's connect, and a lot of multilateral institutes and industries are coming going to we think to connect them and understands all the policies, strategies, and financing aspects, and not only finance, but how the implementers looks and how the community looks for this and what type of gaps we have in terms of pedagogy, in terms of everything. So that will be the discussion. So thank you for joining us. you can close with one words. Anything you want to say to the audience for this? What?
No, no. Yeah, that's fine. Actually, I also enjoyed the session a lot, and thanks to everybody for connecting and for the great questions as well. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you from my end, and my colleague Kiran has joined in this room. And thank you, and thank you for the participants who have joined it. And you can drop a questions to us so that some questions have been not there here. So probably if you want to connect it, you can connect to us with us in IHS so that we'll try to give the answers or we'll connect the experts to that. So thank you, sir. Thank you, one and all.